Good evening, every single person out there in internet land. Welcome to OnlyMOCKS, our mock draft show here at Fantasy and Frames. Today we are doing a very special IDP only, vet only startup mock draft. I got one of the guys who I've looked up to for years in the fantasy football space, and Mr. Mike Wollert from the IDP show, joining us today. We're going to go through 6 rounds, give you our strategies for why we're selecting the players we are for a dynasty mock draft. So let's get into it. Bet you weren't expecting that when you decided to come on the show there, Mike, hearing the little jazz music intro.
Is that for me?
That was for you. That's for you and all the groovy people out there that are enjoying fantasy football mock draft season. Today is a very special day in the world of sports in general. March Madness has officially kicked off, and there has been madness in people's brackets. I know we're talking football here, but first of all, did you fill out a bracket? Is college basketball your thing? And if so, how are you doing so far?
No to the first two, but I do have it on. I will say the NCAA tournament is like that perfect thing to have. It's the perfect time to be working from home because you just have it on and you just listen to it and you watch it and you perk up if something happens. But no, I didn't do a bracket. I was going to put some money into my FanDuel account, and I guess the thing is to bet all of the underdogs, and you'll still make money. Like you'll lose most of the games, but like you'll make money because of the odds because of the odds for the underdog. So I was gonna try that, but I'm like, nah, I just wasn't going to. So
fair enough. Yeah, I'm doing all right in a couple of leagues. There have been a couple upsets here that have been really fun to watch, but I'm right there with you. I love college basketball. Look, we're here talking football. We're here talking fantasy football. I love basketball in general. I think nothing beats being in a basketball stadium or arena. Just the sheer emotion, the ebbs and flows that go with it. I will say, though, I know I have been keeping zero. I have not been keeping my finger on the pulse of just who is who in college basketball. I root for teams. I root for teams that were good back in my time when I was in college. That things have changed. Sorry, Maryland Terrapin fans. It's not been pretty. We didn't even make the NIT. That's how bad it was. So, anywho,
I still hate the teams that I grew up. Like I still hate Duke. I want Duke to lose. Yeah. So all the time. So that's always going to be a given. I will always root against Duke.
I'm right there with you, man. All right, so let's get into what we're all here for. Thank you all for tuning in. We're going to be doing, like I said, a 6-round IDP only, startup mock, vets only, because Sleeper has decided that they're going to be putting in their rookies after the NFL draft, which sucks. But this is what we're working with, so we're going to make the best of it. We got 6 teams here. We got Mr. Nate Markham in there. We got Mike, myself. We got Mace Rainey over here from Fantasy Six Pack. All great work he does over there for their IDP content. So happy to have everybody in here. And so let's just get into it.
Is there a scoring, or is it just kind of like
let's just go with balanced scoring. Let's not do big play or tackle heavy. Let's just go with a balanced approach here.
Works for me.
And we'll just get this mock draft started. And as we go through the draft, we'll give you our, Mike and my strategies of why we're picking the players we're picking and so on and so forth. So let's just get this thing going, starting with Nate at the 101. I bet you he goes edge. I bet you he goes defensive lineman, dual edge rusher here. What are your thoughts? What do you think?
I don't know. He's a KC guy, so maybe Nick Bolton.
Wow, we were both.
Oh, you dick, because that's who I was going to take.
We were Samsonite. We were way off. He went with Roquan Smith at the 101. Very smart.
That's who I was going to take.
High volume tackler. You can't go wrong there. Still young. Absolutely.
Well,
Well, now I'm curious as to who you're going to take. And one thing people you should know who are watching, you know, unlike on offense where you hear of the proverbial age where players start falling off a cliff is in the late 20s, that's not the same thing for IDP. Like defensive players actually have surprisingly more longevity than people give them credit for. Um, so don't be surprised if you see some bets go in the early parts of the draft here. Foya Olukun.
it was a toss up here between. For me, it was a toss up between Franklin and Oluokun, but just because it is a dynasty, I'm still not going to sacrifice production for youth. And as of right now, there's only a handful of people that are producing as many tackles as Oluokun right now, and he's still only 28. So you've got at least, I don't know, 3 or 4 years of I think solid production. And I'm a linebacker whore, so
There you go. Jamie's up in the chat. What's up, Jamie? SoCal Junior 3 took TJ Watt. That's actually who I was going to go for. So you know what? I am going to go with I'm going to go with Micah Parsons. I want to get these. He's you see him on the screen right now, linebacker, but he's more of an edge rusher, and he is on sleeper dual eligible. I like grabbing a lot of these dual eligible players to fill in for spots, especially somebody like a Micah Parsons. This doesn't always happen to be the case. Normally people who are dual eligible tend to lean towards more of the edge rushing, pass rushing side. But Parsons, at least when he was with Dan Quinn, we don't know what's going to happen now with the changes in Dallas. Parsons was playing off ball sometimes. Sometimes he was rushing the passer. Sometimes he was in the middle. He was everywhere. He's literally a Swiss Army knife, and he's young, and he's already taken the league by storm. So can't go wrong there. Follow it up with a Nick Bosa and a Max Crosby pick there. That's not horrible. Ernest. Wow. Okay. Well, this is so crazy. So we got Ernest Jones going off the board, then Nick Bolton. What are your thoughts on that, Mike?
And going through, I'm just now kind of starting to go through my projections. I actually kind of finished my first run of linebacker, and I think I do have. I've got it. They're kind of going to be in that same tier. But Bolton coming off of an injury, an injury plagued season. So Ernest Jones once again is going to be the only one getting tackles in Los Angeles. So
right,
no problems there.
I'm going to go and double up at the edge rusher position, and I'm going to take one of your hometown guys, Myles Garrett. One of those things for defensive linemen, and again, it depends on the platform you're playing on. Obviously, we're doing the mock draft on Sleeper, so for places that just have IDP leagues that have 3 position designations: defensive lineman, linebacker, defensive back, it's very easy to fall off a cliff when it comes to elite defensive linemen for fantasy purposes on platforms like this. So, from my perspective, in terms of constructing this startup, I want to get as much as the elite edge rushing defensive lineman potential that I can get, which is my thought process here, which is why originally I wanted to go for TJ Watt, but getting Parsons and Myles Garrett to start off the draft here is not a horrible way to go about it. Now for you, Mike, as we're waiting for the next pick, startup for IDP, do you go in there with a plan of action, or do you kind of just want to see where the draft lies, or do you kind of try and manipulate the draft in some way? Like, what's your strategy? How do you go into it?
I don't. I mean, for me, it's so interesting. I mean, I think I'm confident in my ability to, I guess, get edge rushers that can produce later on, because the linebacker is so weird now. There's just so many, like after that top 20, it's like, okay, now you're getting into guys that are playing maybe less than 90% of the snaps. Then you're getting into guys that are maybe not full-time guys. So I kind of want to get elite linebackers Um, that's kind of where I go. But I mean, if it really is scoring. It really is scoring system dependent, and like I usually go by, like I said, I usually like to try to get all all the linebackers. I'll probably usually I will start with a couple of linebackers and then get my edge rusher, but um I try not to panic, with all these guys getting taken. So um just I guess you can say just adapt, and
Be water. Be
you're going to
water, my friend.
you're going to be weak. Sometimes you might be weak at something, but you'll be strong at something. With it's still um, I guess a high variance position with defensive linemen. But if I can get at least one guy who I know is going to be like a 15 sack guy, then I'm cool. Like
Okay, so
taking Josh Allen.
Right. So that brings up a question, and you mentioned it does come down to scoring. And for those who are uninitiated into the world of IDP, there is no uniform scoring setting out there. But there are three categories that scoring settings tend to fall under. One is a balanced scoring setting. One is a big play where your sacks and interceptions count for more points. One is a tackle heavy. The third one is tackle heavy. Counterintuitive. Solo tackles count for a lot more points than you would find in a big play or a balanced scoring. Does the fact that we're doing a balance, I mean, obviously you're going Oluokun and Josh Allen, you're going, you're mixing up your positions here. But if it was, for example, a big play scoring scoring setting, would that have shifted your strategy as far as like the positions you're trying to target in your startup?
Yeah, like if someone's only getting maybe 1.25 for a solo and maybe a half a point for an assist or less than a point for an assist, and you're getting then 6 points for a sack, and then if you're throwing in quarterback hits, I'd probably start, because those guys are going to score quite a bit, and I'd probably start, and I've done it before, like with best ball leagues. I've started with edge rushers, the big play guys. So
to round out the second round, you went Ernest Jones, Nick Bolton, Myles Garrett, Aiden Hutchinson. Love that pick. Josh Allen, the other Josh Allen. Nate going back to back here, taking Bobby Okereke, and then Brian Burns, the new New York Giant, followed by Mike taking Zaire Franklin. Damn it. SoCal Jr. taking Kayvon Thibodeau.
See, Thibodeau is a fade for me this year.
Why is that? Well, while I'm figuring out who I'm going to pick here, why don't you tell people why you're fading Kayvon Thibodeau this year?
He had a pressure rate less than 10%.
That's not elite there.
So, and he converted nearly 30% of his pressures into sacks, and that is, in my opinion, an unsustainable rate. So either he was facing quarterbacks that were just holding the ball on for too long, but I'm not taking an early pick on someone with a pressure rate of around 9% and a 10% win rate. So he's probably going to be a fade for me in most instances, unless he's just there in like a late round. I'm like, all right, he's my DL 3 or 4.
Okay, so I am going to go with somebody who is joining one of your division rivals here. I'm going to drink the Kool-Aid on Patrick Queen, going to a good spot in Pittsburgh. Basically, they needed a linebacker after all the injuries they had last year, and here we go.
See, I wrote up Queen as he's in a good spot, but I wrote him up as someone I'm probably not going with.
Is that because of price in terms of the draft cost, or are you talking about performance?
If you look, the Pittsburgh linebackers haven't produced. There hasn't been an elite LB1 in Pittsburgh.
Really?
Yeah. If you look back, there's not been an elite LB1. They've always finished as like LB20 in the LB20s. There hasn't been that like elite guy. I think the last one that might have had a higher finish in the 20s was when Schobert was there.
Okay.
But I think maybe, but I don't. It's been a while since there's been an elite linebacker in Pittsburgh. Plus, they do sometimes, for whatever reason, will take their guys off the field and go with a different dime linebacker. I think that was the instance when they had Robert Spillane. Schobert would come off the field and Spillane was going to be the dime linebacker. So something, I don't know, something about Pittsburgh isn't a bastion or isn't a hot spot for elite. I mean, when you're talking about elite production, it hasn't been, I don't know. It hasn't been there.
And we have Mason in the chat here over on Sleeper saying Queen's contract hasn't out after this year also.
Yeah, it's not this guaranteed contract exactly. It's basically a 1-year deal for the most part, and there is simple outs for Pittsburgh. And if you notice, Queen was not very good until Roquan, and now he's not with Roquan anymore. I think he has not had a season of fewer than 20 missed tackles. And it's just, I don't know. It's a weird thing. He's probably not someone I'm gonna target.
I don't know. I have a different view just because, and I understand the contract situation and I understand the Pittsburgh landing spot, but I also, look at opportunity here and I look at youth, and yes, these are very valid points. Until Roquan got there, you hadn't seen much. I mean, Chris Barnes or Burns, had taken his spot for a good chunk of the season a couple seasons ago. But I am impressed with the trajectory that his performance has had in recent years, and now having this opportunity to be the definitive LB1 on a team in Pittsburgh. I'm going to drink the Kool-Aid here a little bit. Again, this is more of like a youth play and swinging for upside play. Went for Logan Wilson. Well, let's finish off this round. We went Devin White here. Obviously, this is a computer picking. Devin White, your thoughts? Too expensive at this point, or do you think he's still a viable pick for Dynasty because of his age here?
Again, probably not someone I'm not considering.
Okay.
He lost snaps to KJ Britt last year. So
no bueno. Don't forget Sebastian Dennis also.
Yeah, tackle rate of around 9%, one of his lowest. So a bit of a almost tough to say, been in a decline, but
right. Well, hold on. While you're trying to figure out who you're take next, let me go through the rest of the picks so far leading up to yours. Have Will Anderson. I don't know why. I just totally brain fart here. I don't know why I didn't go after Will Anderson, because I'm loving, the signings here in free agency, bringing over Danielle Hunter, bringing over Danico Autry. I think this defensive line is going to be sick to watch for Houston. And plus, obviously, he's entering his second season. He had a good stretch, as the season progressed, as most rookies do. They kind of start to heat up as the season gets longer or goes farther into the season. So I'm a huge fan of Will Anderson right there, because he is, again, dual eligible linebacker and defensive lineman. Then we got TJ Edwards and Fred Warner. For me, I look at these two picks and you think you think about the contract situations for TJ Edwards going over there last year to Chicago. You look at Fred Warner. Fred Warner, I think, is a steal, at least for this season, just because they bring in Devondre Campbell, who kind of has lost a step, or at least he hasn't played as well in recent years, in Green Bay. When he first got there, he was fantastic, phenomenal. But something ever since Quay Walker showed up, I don't know. There's something that is a little bit concerning for me with Devondre Campbell. But Fred Warner, I feel like, is just going to clean up tackle-wise. So I feel like that's like it's like one of those linebackers or one of those positions of fantasy football where you're just like, it's not sexy, but it's a solid one that's a good like foundation anchoring move there. Then again, going to Logan Wilson, and then SoCal Jr., he took a guy out. It was coming down to Logan Wilson for me and this guy, Frankie Luvu. We talked about it on Shoot the Gap last night, JT and myself, Justin Taylor. I am all on board the Frankie Luvu hype train this year. I love the fact that Dan Quinn is going to be having his hands involved in this defense. You saw what he did with Micah Parsons. He took Luvu has the opportunity to be that inside linebacker that can also rush the passer be an efficient edge rusher. That Swiss Army knife type of player that you want to get maximizes all the value. So I'm really big on him here. And then the first defensive back of the draft, very curious, Derwin James. Can you give us your thoughts here on Derwin James here, Mike?
Been reading up on the new defensive coordinator, and it sounds like he's going to basically unleash Derwin James and allow him to do whatever the hell he wants. Staley totally misused him last year, so I am all on board with how Minter's going to use Derwin James. So I think he's got tackle upside, big play upside, and he's going to be he's just going to be all over the field. I think you're going to see him revert back to his elite production.
Nice. Then we got Bobby Wagner. Again, as a Commanders fan, I am ecstatic about this from a real football perspective. For a dynasty perspective, Mike, you saw on Twitter, I refuse to call it X. You see on Twitter, all the reactions like, oh, that's it. Washington's just taking the old player. He doesn't have it anymore. I'm not going to speak to real football on the field stuff because there are a lot of people a lot smarter than me that can do that. What I will say is, though, when you look at numbers, he had one of his most productive years last year, regardless of his age. He's coming to Washington. I think, like I was just saying a few minutes ago with Frankie Luvu is going to be shifting all over the place. And you just have old, reliable Mr., 100 tackle lock-in Bobby Wagner there in the middle playing off ball. And again, to get him at this part of the draft where you just want to get that stability, get that solid foundational piece like we were talking about with Fred Warner a few minutes ago. I love that. And then Danielle Hunter, same principle, older player, but still on a tear. And it goes back to kind of what you were saying, I believe. And please jump in here if you disagree with anything I'm saying. But sacrificing production for youth, I think for IDP is something that should not be overlooked. Your thoughts on the Wagner and the Hunter picks right there by Nate?
You're getting pretty much rocks, steady production for this year. I don't think, it's always, when is Wagner going to finally hit a wall? And it's like, I don't think ever. But it's got to happen at some point. But I don't know. But it hasn't.
Yeah, no, totally.
He led the league in tackles again.
The player that you picked next, so I am super jealous of, and I wish Sleeper, when you have IDP flex roster positions put in there, would still separate out things by positional designation. Because why was Montez Sweat, from a dynasty perspective, slept on for so long? I don't know. This guy led Washington in sacks before he was traded, and then he led Chicago in sacks once he got there. That is ridiculous production. Tell us your thought process with Montez Sweat here, Mike.
Oh, just going to get snaps and has a just a high pressure rate. And DeMarcus Walker. I was looking through DeMarcus Walker. Not horrible. So, a decent piece on the other side. So, I don't know. Just Sweat is one of those guys that is just always seems to produce.
We got Jordan Brooks going to Miami. JT and I, we talked about it again on Shoot the Gap last night, which if you haven't listened to or watched, go over to our YouTube channel. And first of all, since you're there, like and subscribe to the channel so you're notified whenever Fantasy and Frames drops awesome IDP content, as well as dynasty content and redraft content and all fantasy football content. As well as head over to fantasyandframes.com and check out all of our rankings there and article work. But JT and I were talking about Jordan Brooks there. The Dolphins, they bring in David Long last year from the Titans. Whether Jalen Phillips was injured or not, or Van Ginkel was starting or not, there was a shift in Brooks's location on the field of where he would be. Would he play more in coverage? Would he play more closer to the line of scrimmage? lots of like, what are we doing with David Long? Jordan Brooks is pretty much what you see is what you get. He's just your run stopping, thumping linebacker. Would you agree there, or do you think there's something more to Jordan Brooks's game, as well as where you see him falling at this point in the draft?
No, Brooks is pretty solid. I know he sometimes his coverage can be off, but I think he's probably going to be the main guy in Miami again. So I don't mind him there.
No, I love that pick there, especially at this point. Again, letting you have youth and production on his side. Now, I went with Trey Hendrickson, and so last year, going into the season, I was a little concerned. I was a little concerned with Hendrickson because he to me appeared to be very sack or bust. And what did he do last season? He had basically every except for two games, he had a sack. Which, again, what I like about defensive linemen for me specifically is, the sacks are great, but what happens if they don't get sacks? Do they get quarterback hits? Do they get tackles for a loss? It's these stats that really kind of help separate out your base, edge rushers from your upper echelon edge rushers here. And I also like to look at tackle floor. Now, Trey Hendrickson didn't have the greatest tackle floor, so obviously that's going to lower your fantasy floor. But the pressures, the quarterback hits, and most importantly, the sack production was there for Trey Hendrickson. So again, at this point in the draft, I want to get all these very efficient edge rushers here who get the production, like I did with Garrett and Parsons, and now with Trey Hendrickson here. And I just timed out. I need to stop talking. Well, although oh my God, the person who invented creating cues in a draft, I love to death because that's exactly who I was going to pick. But we'll get to that in a second. Team 5 with Micah Fitzpatrick. Quinnen Williams here had kind of an interesting season last season. Basically, offensive linemen learned from the year before that, hey, we should probably block this guy. And so he wasn't as quote unquote dominant as he had been 2 seasons ago. But for, what's going to go on going forward here with the New York Jets, what are your thoughts on Quinnen Williams at this point in the draft, pairing him with the Max Crosby? And then we'll get to Mace's final pick for this draft.
I mean, with DLs, I mean, he's obviously a solid player. So, I mean, still, I think relatively young. So,
so let me phrase this another way.
Yeah.
With DLs, with the, again, 3-position designation IDP type of leagues, the defensive lineman, linebacker, defensive back, more often than not, and please correct me if you disagree, I'm looking at the pure edge rushers. I'm not necessarily looking at those defensive tackles unless I'm playing in a 5-position designation IDP league where you have your tackles, your ends, your linebackers, your cornerbacks, your safeties, so on and so forth.
If you're looking at like tackle heavy, I'm probably looking at the edge rushers. Defensive tackles, you have to have a pretty decent tackle floor. Like I think I'd almost rather take someone like Derek Brown over Keenan Williams because had 103 tackles last year.
Right.
And he's now pretty much one of the only guys. I mean, Burns is gone. Gross Matos is gone, but he was gross anyway. So, but 103 tackles. So, there's only a handful of like DTs that I'd consider in DL general leagues, outside of,
like you mentioned.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you there. And I think that's what made Quinnen Williams such a alluring pick here, even for somebody in a DL league, is that 2 years ago, the tackle numbers and the sack production was there, but he just got double teamed so much last year. It makes you wonder if any additions or subtractions they made along that defensive line and on that defense for the Jets, is that going to really open him up? But I think at this point in the draft, you're looking for the talent to kind of maybe supplant some of the lack of upside at this point. And when he's on fire, he's on fire.
Interesting that Nate went with Cody Barton over Alex Singleton.
Well, we'll get to that in a second. Mace finishing up his draft here with Jalen Carter. Look, Jalen Carter was one of the highest pressure-causing defensive tackles in all of fantasy, in all of the NFL last year. But man, that defensive line still, it's a very scary defensive line because much like how they used to do in Buffalo, it's just a rotation of players. You never know who's the one that's going to go off, from year to year. There's the same principle here for Jalen Carter in a defensive lineman only, type of league. The fact that he does play tackle, is that the same philosophy you have for Quinnen Williams, the same here with Jalen Carter, or do you think there's potentially more upside for Jalen Carter?
Yeah, I don't know. Not with one of my first picks. I mean, I'd still go with someone maybe like. I couldn't believe when I was reviewing last year's stats, as much crap as I used to give Travon Walker, he had the quietest 10-sack season, I think, of anybody in history. I did not even realize he had a double-digit sack season. So he's starting to emerge. I think it's going to be interesting to see what Ryan Nielsen does with someone like him in Jacksonville.
Gotcha. Going to T5, Sauce Gardner. I went George Karlaftis. That's who was in my queue. Again, this is a trend here. I know we're talking about balanced IDP scoring, but I like I said, I feel like there is a precipitous drop-off in the quality of production you find at defensive linemen in leagues that I can find a good LB2. There's a plethora of LB2s and LB3s and LB4s that, and in any given week, can give you LB1 production. It's all about draft costs at a certain point. So I felt fairly comfortable just kind of punting for the most part the linebacker position and getting these elite edge rushers. SoCal Junior after me went Jaquan Brisker. Curious to hear your thoughts on Brisker. Again, going back to JT and I on Shoot the Gap last night, they bring in Jonathan Owens, who is the depth piece behind Brisker. I get it. They bring in Kevin Byard. Can this be a sneaky, super productive tandem for fantasy purposes, Byard and Brisker here in Chicago this year?
I'm probably still taking Brisker over Byard. I think Byard is probably going to play more of a deeper role. That's how I am envisioning him. So I think Brisker is going to still maintain that line of scrimmage role. That's how that's kind of how I'm approaching it.
And then you went with Quay Walker here to finish up for your last pick. What are your thoughts on Quay Walker? Obviously, you like him a lot, or else you wouldn't draft him.
Yeah, I mean, there's no Devondre Campbell. I mean, I don't know who Isaiah McDuffie is probably going to be the LB2, but I mean, I don't think he's a full-time guy. He's basically a two-down guy, and Walker's going to have the entire field probably to himself. I mean, he has 140 tackle upside this year.
And then let's get into your question that you had where Nate finished up the draft here. Cody Barton over Alex Singleton. Let me ask you this question first.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think for fantasy purposes, for just racking up tackle numbers, is Cody Barton an upgrade for fantasy managers over Josie Jewell, who's now a Carolina Panther?
No, I mean, I would take Alex Singleton over Barton, and I would probably take Jewell over Barton. The Broncos defense is, I think, even with the defense they were running last year, Jewell only saw 75% of the snaps. So it's not a full-time role, that LB2. Alex Singleton is the three-down guy. He's wearing the dot. Cody Barton is, as much as I was driving the Cody Barton train over the last few years, I'm getting off because he's not really that good. I know he's not. And I'm envisioning him as kind of the Jewell, kind of the Jewell role, and maybe even less than that. I think if I were to project him out, I'd probably have him at about, what do I mean, I think, like I said, I finished my first run of projections. I've got him at about 702 snaps initially. So at his tackle rate the last few years, I've got him barely at 95 tackles. So at his current rate. So I'm definitely not taking Barton over Alex Singleton. That's for sure.
No, I can understand that. And I think something that's important to remind fantasy managers who play fantasy IDP fantasy football is snap count is probably one of the most important stats that gets very much overlooked amongst players, because at the end of the day, you have to be on the field a majority of the time to see the production. I mean, that's kind of intuitive, right? That's Booger McFarland level fantasy analysis right there. You got to be on the field to get points. You know what I mean? So yeah, I can see what you're saying there. I did not know that the LB2 there for Denver was floating around 75% of snaps compared to the LB1 there. That's good to know, actually.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where like I said, that's where he fell off. And yeah, I think that, that's, I mean, look at Singleton has averaged he's got, what is he average? 160 tackles a year over the last couple of years. I mean, he's just everywhere. You see that long hair flowing and he's there. So it was an interesting spot for him.
Yeah, so let's look at these teams here, and let's exclude ourselves here for the sake of being unbiased here. If you're looking at Nate's team, where he went fairly linebacker heavy, though, you're looking at Mace's team at the end here with the 3 linemen and the 3 linebackers, and of course a SoCal Junior 3. From a dynasty perspective, for fantasy perspective, which team do you think brings the best balance of can produce now / has the potential to have more long-term upside from a fantasy perspective?
I mean, probably a combination of probably I'd honestly say probably Mace's team, because I mean, I like Crosby, I like Jones. Anderson's hopefully only going to get better.
Right.
The addition of Grenard is certainly going to help. Or no, is that who? Yeah, no,
Hunter.
Hunter. Grenard is in Minnesota.
Yep.
But yeah, the addition of Hunter is going to help him. Is going to relieve him of seeing any potential double teams that he probably would have seen had they not replaced Grenard. Edwards is always a good solid pick. It's just those 2 DL picks at the end.
That's what
are a little rough. But yeah, I mean, in terms of, I would say probably his team. And you started off well. I think Zimmer's going to really have fun with Micah Parsons. I guess my only concern is that if he does use Parsons more as an off-ball linebacker, what's that going to do to his sack numbers? But I think I don't see any reason why you would remove him with what he does best.
Right. No, that makes sense. So that's our draft, folks. Look, for those who are, I know it's a small sample, and of course, here at Fantasy and Frames, and of course where Mike's at the IDP show, we get into a lot more in-depth, analysis, as well as talking about players and telling you why we like players for certain things. But it all comes down to scoring settings. Again, we talked about the main big 3 categories: big play, where you get more points than you would traditionally, for interceptions, for sacks. Then you have your tackle heavy, which really favors linebackers, off-ball linebackers. Then you get, of course, the balanced, which you could still have in a balanced setting, high volume, high tackle number of fantasy points, as well as for big plays. So there's a lot of mixing and matching with IDP, which is kind of part of the fun of it, is because you can make it and play however the hell you want, and it completely can adjust your strategy from just how things are on offense, where it's like, well, it's a PPR league. I better get all these running backs in the later rounds of my draft that have receiving upside. And it's like, well, okay, but there's different variations. There's different variability with IDP based off of the three different categories and how you're adjusting your scoring settings to favor one particular position or multiple positions. So, in future episodes, when we do more of a combination of mock drafts where we have offensive players and IDPs, we'll make sure to kind of like draw the comparisons between what is the value of a linebacker compared to a wide receiver at a certain point in the draft, or a running back, or a tight end, and so on and so forth. Because I think that's something like that kind of scares a lot of people when they're new to IDP or haven't given it a shot yet. Is that the question comes, where do I assess value? What is value when you have both offensive players and defensive players? And again, it all comes down to scoring settings for IDP, I believe. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that? That it's the assessment of value, or is there other things that may pop into people's heads that might throw people off of IDP?
It honestly, it is tough to measure value when you're doing like a mixed league. So I think it all just comes down to basically your roster construction and look at your scoring. That's basically what it comes down to. I always like to try to build out my offense first and then tackle my first IDP, but I think it just comes down to roster construction and your scoring. Like I said, I always like to make sure I have a decent offense, because whenever I've taken an IDP for like early, the rest of my team suffers. I lose running back depth, or I'll lose something in a wide receiver. So, it's the positions are pretty deep, but when you do start looking at the snaps, especially at the linebacker position, you're battling variance a little bit more on a weekly basis. So when you're getting those guys, when you're drafting guys that are only getting, and they have value, don't get me wrong. Like if you're starting 4 or 5 linebackers, yeah, you're going to probably have to play these guys that are getting 75% of the snaps. But when it comes down to your battling variance, because when the fewer the snaps that you're playing, the lower your production. So you can't, rely on, this guy, you can't box score chase. So, hey, this guy had 10 tackles. Yeah, he only played 30% of the snaps, though. He had a really boom game, and you can't rely on that. So you really, it's really got to make sure that, again, and those guys that sometimes maybe they do get 75, 80% of the snaps, but they're consistent they're consistent in their production. But again, when you're taking a chance at battling variance.
No, makes totally 100% agree. Just want to give a shout out. It's like I said at the beginning of the show, it is the very first day of March Madness, and I know a lot of you out there are, have us on screen, 150 of you right now across our social media channels. Thank you very much for tuning in. It means the world to us to have you hear us talk about IDP fantasy football. We know it's a tiny niche in the world of the fantasy football landscape, but you know what? It's fun. It's just fun. And that's why you play fantasy football, because you enjoy having a good time. It's fun to play. So we appreciate you tuning in. Mike, before we get out, why don't you tell the good people where they can find you on social media and what you got working on?
At Mike_Wollert on Twitter, and I'm now at the IDP show. So that's where you can find all of our stuff. Go to the IDP show. Most of our off-season content is going to be free. Our draft kit will be out in May. That will be a modest charge, but it's going to be
worth it.
Well worth it. So that's where you will find me and now my rankings and projections. Got a few articles right now outlining free agency. Just did something on the AFC coaching changes, looking at the NFC coaching changes next, and it's WrestleMania season also. So really looking forward to WrestleMania this year. I mean, I know we're talking about IDP, but I mean, they've done such a masterful job of building up, and this is like the first WrestleMania that I'm actually like really geeked to watch It's almost like Attitude Era again within the WWE, like organically recreating the Attitude Era. And The Rock is one of the only guys that has gotten me to watch a 21-minute promo. I can't believe I watched it. I started watching, I'm like, dude, this is 20 minutes. Are you serious? And the next thing I know, I'm finishing it. I'm like, dude.
Yeah.
Sorry, I hope Cody loses still too.
I do too. Oh my god.
Good.
So one of the perks of being the founder of Fantasy and Frames is I get to talk about whatever I want. And I Keith Fleming and myself here at Fantasy and Frames, we started a pro wrestling podcast called Inside the Squared Circle. Not Fantasy and Frames related, just an offshoot. As you can see, I got my 2 Winged Eagle belts right there, and I got a John Cena towel right over there, and other action figures galore coming out of my my basement closet here. It is I am totally embracing.
I acknowledge my tribal chief.
Acknowledge the tribal chief.
But
I love it.
With still a little bit of
Stone Cold Steve Austin. I love it. So yeah, if you give us a follow over there at Inside SQ Circle on Twitter, on TikTok, as well as on our YouTube channel, and we're on Facebook too. So just a little support there. But most importantly, folks, we really appreciate your support, supporting Fantasy and Frames and all of the great work that all of our analysts are doing here. We got articles, we got rankings, we got a plethora of podcasts. The other day, the Fourth and Frames crew, which we consider our flagship podcast here, had Alfredo Brown from Football Guys join them, and they were talking about coaching changes and the fantasy football impact that has. JT and I, we did Shoot the Gap. Stacey Perez, the host of Dynasty 365, she had a bunch of us on there talking about rookie prospect wide receivers and the value there, which part 2 of that will be on a special episode this coming Monday. Tomorrow night, folks, at 10:30-ish p.m. Eastern time, Kevin Tompkins from Fantasy Alarm, myself, and Keith Fleming will be doing our weekly Fantasy Football Weekly show, which, Mike, you are always welcome to join. It is very my goal is to keep it as very non-PC as possible, talking about the world of fantasy football, what's trendy in fantasy football, what you like, what you don't like. And if you want to throw in some other random crap too, have fun with that as well. So tune into that Friday tomorrow night. Would really appreciate your support there. And again, thank you very much for everybody who's been tuning in tonight. We really appreciate just the love you have for Fantasy and Frames and for IDP Fantasy Football. So for Mike, I'm Jorge. You all enjoy the rest of your evening.